Well, today was the annual meeting of the minds for the 5 countries known simply as BRICS. The leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa got together to talk about some of the ways they might be able to work together to make moves that make a difference on the global chessboard. Now, it's only a one-day summit, but these countries together make up half of the world's population and 1/5 of global economic output. And some of their supporters see their mission as creating a new global architecture of sorts. On the docket this year, a pretty unified front when it came to the subject of military interventionism. From Iran to Syria, the group is vehemently opposed to any outside military involvement. And they also talk about the role of BRICS in decisions regarding the global economy. Now, I want to talk about some of these things with economic analyst Gonzalo Lira. Hey there, Mr. Lira. This is a group that has really been able to speak, in some cases, with one voice on a number of issues. But quite a few critics of BRICS ask, what has this group accomplished since its inception back in 2009?
Well, 2 years of existence is very little to accomplish much, so that's a silly point. People have to be worried about BRICS because of the following. They are the largest economic group on the planet. The United States economy, the GDP of the United States last year was approximately $15 trillion. The equivalent for the Eurozone was about $16 trillion. The BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, account for over $18 trillion last year. That's the size of their GDP combined. Now, their intra-trade is growing at a rate of about 30% per year. That's the trade within those 5 countries. So this is very important. This is a key group that the mainstream media is not paying attention to, but ought to be paying attention to because, it's the biggest economy in the world. Now, if these 5 countries start to implement a closed trading system among themselves and exclude Europe and the United States, well, then we're going to see some serious shifts in the global economy.
And I think some of these leaders also sort of feel that power, not only with trade, but with the economy, especially since a lot of them are, what we call emerging markets. And there's been a lot of talk, probably as a result of the so-called South-South Development Fund, this formation in the future possibly of a joint development bank. What are the possibilities that this could actually happen? Those 5 countries forming a bank, it seems to me they want to have an alternative to, institutions like the World Bank, which they complain has always been led by an American, the IMF, which is always led by a European. They seem to want to have an alternative. Is that viable?
Yes, it is. The key issue of this summit is that they're going to be signing agreements to trade among themselves in their own currency and have swap agreements, that is, currency exchange agreements between their central banks in order to swap the excess currencies they accumulate of each other's denomination. For instance, between Russia and Brazil, say, they'll as they accumulate currency in either one of those 2 countries, their central banks will swap those currencies in order to maintain the balance of trade, which is the typical function of the central bank. Now, this is important because it creates a self-sustaining cycle among these 5 countries. Now, South Africa is really the small one. The ones that really matter, of course, are Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Those countries, if they start doing this independent bloc, will present an economic challenge to the West, that is, to the Eurozone, and to the North American Free Trade Agreement. This is really important. Now, if they manage to create an analogous institution to the World Bank, that's all good and fine. But that's not really the important thing. It's the currency swaps, which seems so obscure. But that's the key issue because it smooths the trade between those 5 countries. As I said before, they are trading, their trade among themselves is growing at a rate of about 30% per year. It's only $230 billion per year at this point. But if you're growing that trade, that number, from by 30% every year, year after year, very quickly that number is going to become huge, and that is when these 5 countries will present a serious challenge to the West.
But it seems surprising to me, Gonzalo, that just these 5 countries, if they're going to sort of create a wall around themselves concerning trade, it seems hard to swallow that they'd be able to function without the help of the West at all.
Oh, no, that's not an issue that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that they're creating a wall that they're going to be self-sustaining. Not at all. They'll continue to trade with the West, but the point is that the dollar will no longer be the undisputed reserve currency. Now, the dollar has been the reserve currency because part of the agreement, the tacit agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia, was the United States supplied military protection, and Saudi Arabia guaranteed that it would only trade oil in dollars. Now, of course, Saudi Arabia is the largest exporter of oil on the planet, has the largest proven reserves on the planet. So, of course, this ensured that the dollar would remain as the currency of choice in the world's global trade. But if these 5 countries succeed in this scheme to swap each other's currency and maintain a foreign currency exchange among themselves, this will erode the dollar status. Now, why is this important? Because it'll become harder for the United States to fund its deficit. Remember, people only buy, that is, foreign countries only buy U.S. Treasury bonds because the dollar is the world's trading currency. Now, if that status is eroded, if the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, if it becomes atomized among the Brazilian real, the Russian ruble, the Indian rupee, and so forth, then there will not be that need to buy treasury bonds, because after all, foreign countries are buying treasury bonds because they need those dollars in order to buy oil and other commodities which are currently priced in dollars. Now, as that is eroded by this unification of the BRICS, it's going to start affecting the American economy, specifically the American ability to fund itself via debt. And that will put added pressure on the Federal Reserve to go into printing press mode and print up more dollars, and thus accelerating the decay of the dollar as the reserve currency.
Well, let's talk to, certainly this tipping the scales of the economy is one of the most important things that these countries talk about, but they also seem to want to make sure that the rest of the world knew their position on military interventionism. Certainly China and Russia already had that opportunity at the United Nations, but they made sure that everyone knew that all BRICS countries are unified in the fact that they are vehemently opposed to any sort of intervention in Iran, in Syria. Why do you think that this is necessary for them to sort of put that out there?
Well, because they depend on Iran for their oil. I mean, both India and China, the #1 supplier of oil to India and China is Iran. Now, they want to make sure that Iranian oil continues to flow their way at reasonable prices. And the more uncertainty and the more warmongering that's going on in the West vis-a-vis Iran, the higher the price of oil, and that hurts India and China, and they certainly don't want that. So, of course, they're going to be making it clear that their view is no war with Iran, no war in the Middle East. They just want things to just settle and continue as they are. It's not that they are, that they love Iran. They just want to maintain the status quo in order to not be worried about their domestic economic situation, which is perfectly reasonable.
Just real quick, I just want to get one more question in because we're almost out of time. What do you have to say to those people? I mean, a lot of people, as you said, the mainstream media is not really covering this at all. Some people are taking a look at this and saying this is just a photo op. Really quick, what would you say to those people?
Wait 5 years. And when the dollar reserve currency status is no longer as foolproof as it is today, then we'll talk.
All right, economic analyst Gonzalo Lira, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.